project evaluation is so important? There's three main things that I see in this. The first one is deciding whether you met your goal. So say your goal is improving access to nutrition. So evaluating at the end of the whole process, however long that may be, whether you met the goal of improving access to nutrition. The second half of that is evaluating whether you did it in the right way. And by that I mean whether you did it in a sustainable, culturally appropriate way, because you can have a sustainable project that's not successful. And by that I mean you can have a project that, that is solid, that the community is going to maintain for various reasons, whether from outside influence or pressures or whatever it may be. But if you've done more damage along the way than good, I wouldn't call it a success. So evaluations are extremely important, but they're getting more and more challenging. And especially in the type of work that I've been doing the past 3 years, I think the reason for that is that we're moving kind of from this model of infrastructure where we have we go into the community and we give a grant to build latrines. We're moving from that towards a more empowerment model where the community, instead of deciding to build latrines, will decide that they want to form a women's group and talk about gender issues, or form a youth group and do trash pickups in the community. And that raises a very interesting question of how do you evaluate something like empowerment? How do you evaluate the level that somebody has been empowered through a project or through the process? So the way that Amigos, the organization I've been working with, the way that we try to evaluate these very intangible project results is through participatory evaluations. And that entails a lot of different things. It can take on a lot of different forms, but one form is the meeting I described earlier, where you're like sitting in a circle with a bunch of people and you're drawing pictures about your feelings. It's very tricky to turn that into a report. But especially in this model of like talking about your feelings and not just collecting data when you're going from quantitative to qualitative, you have in Honduras what we call pena, which is a really big problem, and it's not meant in a derogatory way. It's more just like a general timidness, shyness, and specifically in the evaluation context, it's an unwillingness to talk about anything that could hurt my feelings, or anything that's along the lines of negative, constructive feedback. So you hear all the positive stuff, but you don't hear anything about what you're doing wrong. And that's really frustrating. And along the lines of PENA, some challenges that this brings up is just the general inability to get accurate information. So if somebody's not telling you that you're doing something wrong, they're probably not telling you what you're doing right. Because, you know, I think that we're at the point where it's impossible to do everything right. And I think everyone's aware of that, but when people are telling you over and over again, no, everything's fine, no, you're doing everything right, no, this is great, we love working with the organization, you start to believe it. And whether they do love working with the organization or not is kind of beside the point. You get stuck in this rut if nobody ever tells you you're doing something wrong, where you can't make yourself improve. There's nothing constructive about it. So again, going back to my experiences and evaluations, I started getting really frustrated, felt like I wasn't really hearing the truth, and I started thinking about relationships and how my volunteer's host father had placed so much value on the relationship above any of the other things that the volunteers had accomplished in the community. And I was remembering my time as a volunteer, and when I was living in Nicaragua when I was 18, and the community had decided to build a library. So my two partners and I and the local youth we were collaborating with, we had just spent all this energy and all this time writing grant applications to organizations, traveling to different cities to meet with local governmental officials, and doing local fundraisers, and trying to secure books and working on the construction. And so I brought the woman I was living with, my host mother, I brought her up one day to see the progress that was being made on the library. And at this point, the walls were like this high probably, so you could kind of see the general outline of how big the building was going to be. And there were two of the youth that we had been working with were doing construction at that point, and a local man who was kind of an expert in construction who was overseeing everything. So it's the five of us, and she walks up and her very initial reaction is, oh, that's it? Like, that's so small. And then she tries to take it back. She's like, no, it's great, like this is such a good project, it's a library, we're gonna have a library. Because she didn't want to offend any of us that were there that had been, directly involved in this project. But the fact that I'd been living with her for about 2 months at this point, and we knew each other very well, and I could just tell by the expression on her face that she felt like the amount of energy and resources that the community was putting into this project, they weren't getting enough out of it. And that's something that it wasn't, an official evaluation that I was doing, but that's something that I can take away, and I have solid information that there's a disconnect between what they're putting in and what we're getting out, and this is something solid that the organization that I was working for can take and say, okay, we either need to do a better job of communicating from the get-go, like what expectations are and what's going to come out of this, or within even the community itself, people working on the project and people not need to do a better job of communicating, but you can get something solid out of that you can't get from just sitting in a meeting with people you've only hung out with like 8 times throughout the summer. So then we come to how do we get past this concept of pen? How do we get past this barrier that we have to talking about what's actually going on? And for this, there's several things. The first one is immersion, which I think is one of the most straightforward things you can do, and it immediately takes away physical and mental boundaries. If the person who's evaluating the project is also the person who's living next to the people that you're working with and carrying out the same daily activities, you're physically closer, and mentally it shows that you have a real interest in people's lives and that you're open to learning. And that immediately allows people to then kind of step up and speak up and give you information that you need. The other one is listening first. And this one is, we talk about this all the time, oh, listen first, grassroots development, and everything has to come from the community. But it's very rare that it actually gets carried out this way. I think I'm very guilty of this too, but just constantly hearing stories of everyone I know, we have these ideas, we want to do these projects, we go into a community, we're like, okay, this is going to be great, we're going to do this. And even if we fully believe in grassroots development, we fully believe in community initiative, and everything comes from the people, if you already have an idea in your mind, you're not going to hear what people are telling you. And that's extremely important, just going in as hard as it is and listening first and then talking. The third one, which I think is the most important, is making yourself vulnerable. Because if you want people to question you and challenge you in order to improve yourself and to have the organization you're working for, whatever you may be doing, improve, you have to show that you don't know everything, that you're open to criticism, and that you're not like the best person in the world, even if you might be. And in terms of forming relationships, I really think you can't form an honest, true relationship with somebody unless you trust them as much as they trust you. And part of learning how to trust somebody is putting yourself out there, opening yourself up, talking about, in my context, talking about being homesick or not adjusting to the food or being afraid of something, or even saying, I don't agree with everything that my organization is doing. What do you think? And kind of opening up dialogue that way. And the last one is asking questions and the way in which you should ask questions. And for me, again, in my context, this means I wasn't getting any information out of the meetings that I was having where we're sitting outside in a circle or whatever, and I would say, so we're going to talk about good things about the organization, we're going to talk about bad things. And, hopefully everyone's going to say one of each to kind of balance it out. And nobody will say anything bad. And then I was doing a different form of this participatory evaluation, and I was sitting down with the host mother of one of my volunteers, and we were drinking coffee, we were talking about life, talking about the projects, talking about the volunteers.